Now, this is a National Geographic article, everybody. I'm just reminding you of that, okay? And hold on, because this story is going to get more and more incredible as we go. And if you guys are wondering whether Lois Jessop's story is real, hang on to the end of this, because John has got the juice on this. We've got potentially the most bizarre story and account of giants being seen in the underworld, in the inner earth, that we've ever seen before.
What the data was describing is that they were using a kind of echolocation that they have developed while living underground.
Have you ever heard of the curse of the Hypogeum? Malta's mysterious tunnels hide ancient history, but also extensive sightings of strange beings throughout the ages. Why did National Geographic report in 1940 about a tragedy of many missing schoolchildren if it were all a hoax? What did Lois Jessop really see in the mid-30s that lined up with Nat Geo's account just 5 to 10 years later? Skeletons and scary creature encounters are just the beginning. Join me, investigative researcher Rob Counts, and remote viewer John Vivanco to hear remote viewing data on Lois's encounter, the missing children's experience, the creatures, and more. Tune in for a metaphysical episode that's out of this world.
If you're listening to this Metaphysical podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcast, or anywhere else, leave us a 5-star rating and review to help us reach even more people. Remember, you got to like, follow, and subscribe on YouTube, Rumble, Ganjing World, Twitter, and Facebook if you want to keep up to date on what's happening next.
John, how you doing?
I'm doing great.
You said great as if there's going to be a crazy episode ahead.
I think so. Yeah, I think so. I mean, there's a lot of weird stuff that we've seen with remote viewing around this Malta stuff already, but I think it gets a little bit weirder. I don't know. Maybe it doesn't. It's just like cul-de-sacs of weird. It's another cul-de-sac of weird.
I would go ahead and call this the weirdest. This is, if you have not heard this story before, or you're not even sure whether it was real or not, whether it was fake, this is going to be like worldview changing metaphysical material. Probably one of the reasons we're calling this the curse of the Hypogeum, mysterious tunnels and missing children in Malta. And actually, I figured we probably should start this episode by a very, very interesting quote that we found in 1649. Maltese historian Giovanni Francisco Abella shared one of the earliest known observations of the Hagar Chim, I think it's called, Hagar Kim. This is one of the sites in Malta. He said, quote, that it was, quote, indubitable evidence of the fact that the first inhabitants of Malta were of the race of giants, unquote. What I find so...
I would agree.
Yeah, what I would find I find so interesting and so funny about this is, like, oftentimes we look back on ancient man and we think they are unintelligent. But if you think about it, it's like, what's so funny is, even if that's true, even the simplest person could look at this and be able to tell you that that's what it was. I mean, it's just so blatantly obvious, and it's right in front of our eyes, and people are not accepting of what they're seeing. That's what's crazy.
Right.
I mean, think about it, John. If an angel came down from the heavens right now, or a god came down from the heavens, and everyone saw it, and then it got posted onto social media, there was a video taken of it, it was put on social media, no one would believe it. Right. Everyone would be like, this is not true. This is a fake video. This is blah, blah, blah. And then if you just say what was seen, people would be like, show me the proof, bro. That's cap, bro. Right. It's like,
I know.
Yo, I mean, it's really that's why it's so important for us to have these discussions is it's really up to you at home to discern because no one is going to tell you on social media what's true and what's not. Everyone's going to have an opinion and it's like whoever is the loudest wins over there. So, we've got to get better at discerning this stuff.
I spending a lifetime in remote viewing, and coming from the initial standpoint of not knowing. I mean, I've always been into trying to understand the more conspiracy side. My whole life, I have, but remote viewing truly like opened my eyes up to what's truly going on here. And I still don't know what's truly going on here. But I do know that we have this consensus reality, consensus perception that is dictated and driven by what your neighbor says, by what that authority says, and by what people start taking on as being real and not real. And that belief, that attitude doesn't make something real, right? And so you are being told how to think. I'm not telling anybody how to think. I'm saying explore for yourself. And a lot of stuff we find actually is not truly real, right? But when we go into a lot of these things, we pick out the things that are real in a sense, so that there is something to really, dig your teeth into, right?
Yeah, to chew on.
And what you find ultimately is that we are so closed off with these blinders based off of consensus reality, and we find it very scary to venture outside of it. But the moment you start stepping outside of it, the whole construct falls like dominoes, all of it, so
Well, yeah, I mean, whoever controls the information controls the narrative, controls what people do, how they think, everything. I mean, we as a human race allow ourselves to be controlled and I think in a scary way. I mean, um, it's history. You can easily track history back and honestly, one of the things that I find like that I would love to sit down with some of the archaeologists or academics that I find on YouTube that are debunking people like Graham Hancock and sit down with them and be like, you know, I'm not doubting your profession or what you think you know, but what I would like to tell you is you may have a limited idea of history because you can even look into things like communism and the history that it rolled out in and how the world was then controlled after Marx, Engels, Darwin, what really happened there. You would have a much better idea of things that are happening now and how they transpired. And if you don't have that foundation, you're living in a diluted state because you don't know what these corporations, these different people around you are doing and and what how they've constructed a narrative. They
right.
don't even believe there is a narrative. They believe that's conspiracy talk. Like that is conspiracy talk and it's not at all. This is a now if you guys are interested in this, this is a very probably the most detailed series that we have on Rise TV that goes through the history of communism and it goes back to a scary early time and it I will tell you right now this series will knock your socks off. It will explain so much about what's going on now that you didn't know. Whether you like communism or not, it's worth just to figure out and to understand what the history was.
And also, I think these the people who run countries, and the people beyond behind the people who run countries, think in terms of 100 years from now, 50 years from now. How do we achieve this result, that result? Well, generations only think within their generation of, the average person, right? These people think way far ahead in how to achieve results, and so you have to be very, very aware of the types of media social engineering that gets placed on a population, because they're not going after the older generations, they're going after the younger ones, so that 100 years from now the landscape is completely different than what it is. Completely different.
Totally. And this episode is going to deliver, because this 1940 National Geographic story, Wanderers a Wheel in Malta, British stronghold, has been a stepping stone of conquest since Phoenicians cruised the Mediterranean and St. Paul was shipwrecked there. This article has an incredible amount of information that we're going to go through, and it's going to lead us into a larger story having to do with things that were seen in the Hypogeum by explorers. And they're all tied together. And then John's eventual remote viewing data that will blow the top off of this entire thing. John and I have been working on this episode for a long time, like for weeks and weeks right now, to try to help you guys
Yeah.
understand how insane this is, that the Hypogeum is. Why don't we just get into this article a little bit here? So we've got a prehistoric periscope as a part of this article. It says the Hypogeum near Hal Safliani is a remarkable megalithic temple where prehistoric man worshipped his deities and buried his dead. Long shafts descended 30 feet below the Earth's surface, where carved from solid sandstone lie dozens of odd rooms, including an altar, a long hallway, and a treasure vault. One of the chambers opens to the outside through a long shaft into which snakes and wild animals fell to their death. It is littered with bones and tusks unfamiliar to our age. Near this gruesome butcher shop lies a megalithic reservoir, a deep, tapering rain catcher. Think about that for a second.
It's a funnel, basically. I wouldn't necessarily call it a rain catcher. I call it a trap.
A trap, true, but a reservoir for water is interesting
Right.
in and of itself. It means beings are living down there for who knows how long in the dark.
Yeah, the apparently the Maltese government is using a lot of the underground for reservoirs at this point in time. So yeah.
And actually, more of what John just said is going to be outlined in this article. In another chamber is a hollow in the wall into which the high priest must have spoken. When Ham and I, that's the person this gentleman was with, when Ham and I spoke into it, I could hear his words in any room in the temple. The whole structure seemed to vibrate with sounds. Most uncanny of all was the fact that, whereas low tones could be heard everywhere distinctly, high pitched notes did not carry farther than the chamber itself. When Ham shrieked a falsetto version of O Sole Mio into the hollow, not a sound of it reached my ears. Now, this is a National Geographic article, everybody. I'm just reminding you of that, okay? And hold on, because this story is going to get more and more incredible as we go. More than once, we soundly cursed the remiss methods of megalithic people. Their smoothly hewn walls and doorways were not over 4.5 feet high, forcing us to pleat our 6-foot statures to a more practical height. Goes back to the troglodytes right there. Pleat means duck, fold. They were ducking. All right, tragedy in Malta's tunneled maze. Our friends told us that the island was honeycombed with a network of underground passages, many of them catacombs. Years ago, one could walk underground from one end of Malta to the other, but all entrances were closed by the government because of a tragedy. On a sightseeing trip comparable to a nature study tour in our own schools, a number of elementary school children and their teachers descended into the tunneled maze and did not return. For weeks, mothers declared that they had heard wailing and screaming from underground, but numerous excavations and searching parties brought no trace of lost souls. After 3 weeks, they were finally given up for dead. Sections of this underground network have been used to protect military and naval supplies. Indeed, many of the fortifications themselves are merely caps atop a maze of tunnels. Among the first activities of Italy after Mussolini's declaration of war on June 10th was the bombing of the island. The establishment in 1937 of a new air base, in addition to the tremendously strategic naval position she occupies, makes Malta guardian of the central Mediterranean, a possession to be prized, perhaps again to be fought for, which in just a couple of years, it becomes the most bombed place in all of World War II.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, we just brought up the children that basically were lost in the tunnels.
Disappeared, never heard from again. I know there are people who tried to research the story, couldn't find much though.
Okay, so what? Now let's get into this a little bit because this is where some of the contention around this lies is the evidence of missing children. We're seeing this in a National Geographic article. It's the only place other than another account by a woman named Lois Jessop that we see this. Okay, so what could have happened? Why would we have no evidence of the story of lost children when we're talking about, let's say 30 children, something like that, just getting lost in tunnels? Why would there be no evidence of this? Well, there was verbal evidence. There was discussion that this story was in the newspapers on Malta at the time. Okay, they had newspapers at the time. It was published in newspapers. People on the island were aware of it, and verbally it was being passed around. Now, we're talking about 1940 here. Just a few years later, Malta becomes the most bombed place in the entire World War II. We're talking about every family on the island of Malta trying to survive. The memory of such an event would be pushed into the far distant past if this was the case, because we're talking about everybody on Malta's lives being in danger for a long period of time.
Yeah,
And
that's a good point.
right. Okay, so here it is, the Malta mystery. This is a 1942 article. Malta is the most bombed objective of the war. It has taken more raids even than Chongqing, which is in a state of almost continuous destruction and rebuilding. Chongqing is in China. But the importance of Malta, which is traditional, has unexpectedly increased in the last month. Now, we're talking about this becoming the central point of war for a period of time where I guess all of Hitler's forces was bent on taking Malta. And we covered this in a previous episode, so you can go back and look at that if you'd like. Okay, so the children. Now, it was corroborated in a story by a woman named Lois Jessop. Now, her claim was published by the New York Saucer Information Bureau. This is where it gets weird because Lois Jessop is a very interesting person. Very, very interesting person. Way more interesting than we initially thought, even hearing her story at the beginning. Now, this story came out publicly around 1960. So this is in the mid-1930s. Constance, Lois Jessop, and friends visited Malta. One afternoon, 6 of us decided to hire a car and visit some of the many historical tourist attractions on the island. Obviously, this is Lois's account here. One of our party suggested that since the weather was very hot, our best bet was to visit some of the caves and underground temples. At least there we could keep cool for a few hours. Some few miles out of Valletta, the capital of Malta, is the little town of Pala. It has only one main street, Hal Saflieni, and on this is the entrance to an underground temple known as the Hypogeum of Hal Saflieni. We stopped here and sought out a guide for a tour of the cave or catacombs of the Hypogeum. There was a fairly large cave entrance with ancient mural decorations of whorls and wavy lines, diamond patches here and there, also oval patterns seemingly painted with red ochre. The entrance itself smelt damp and moldy, but inside the cave there was not a trace of mustiness. Joe, the guide, told us there were 3 floors of underground rooms and gave each of us a lighted candle. One by one, we bent down low to walk through a narrow passage which led to a step or two, and again, we were able to stand up in a fair-sized room which had been built out of the Malta sandstone eons ago in the Stone Age. Joe told of a powerful oracle or wishing well deep down and how it had worked wonders in the old days for the initiated who knew the correct sound to use. I think the oracle still works today unless it was damaged. Malta was heavily bombarded during World War II. This is interesting. This guy Joe back then knew about a well in the oracle and potential spelling in there if you knew how to use it. Now, the oracle was supposed to work only if a male voice called to it, but as the guide was saying this, I slipped down a small step and gave a yell that was picked up by something and magnified throughout the whole cave. We followed the guide through some more narrow passages which led down, and then straightened our backs again when we came into another room. In this large opening was a circular stone table or altar in the center of the room. Cut out of the rock walls around were layers of stone beds or resting places of some kind, with hollows scooped out for head, body, and narrowing to the feet. I guess these were places for adults about 4 feet tall, with smaller scooped out beds. It looked like mother, father, and child either slept or were buried there, although we saw no bodies there. Down, down, down again, stooping and crawling through a narrow passage into another large room with slits or narrow openings in the stone wall. They buried their dead in here, said the guide. I peered through a slit and saw skeletons, another. Through another slit, I peered into a cave where, the guide said, they kept their prisoners. A 3-foot thick stone door about 4 feet high and 4 feet wide guarded the entrance. That sounds very heavy. 3-foot thick stone door about 4 feet high and 4 feet wide. Like, we're talking about hundreds and hundreds of pounds, like maybe 700 pounds.
Right. I mean, these things, even on the surface, were made as prisons. It's really interesting, and they realize that deep in the hypogeum, but they don't apply that to what's on the surface.
When she brings it up next, she said, quote, "What kind of people and how strong were these pygmies to be able to carve out these rooms to a definite pattern and to move doors this thick and heavy?" I thought. "This is the end of the tour," Joe the guide said. "We must now turn and retrace our steps." "What's down there?" I asked him, for on turning I noticed another opening off one of the walls. "Go there at your own risk," he replied, "and you won't go far." I was all for more exploring, and talking it over with my friends, 3 of them decided to go with me and 2 waited with the guide. I was wearing a long sash around my dress, and since I decided to lead the group, I asked the next one behind me to hold on to it. Holding our half-burnt candles, the 4 of us ducked into this passage, which was narrower and lower than the others. Groping and laughing our way along, I came out first onto a ledge pathway about 2 feet wide, with a sheer drop about 50 feet or more on my right, a wall on my left. And you guys, this is where it gets completely mental. Like mental. I took a step forward, close to the rock wall side. The person behind me, still holding onto my sash, had not yet emerged from the passage. Thinking it was quite a drop and perhaps I should go no further without the guide, I held up my candle. There, across the cave, from an opening deep below me, emerged 20 persons of giant stature. In single file, they walked along a narrow ledge. Their height I judged to be about 20 or 25 feet, since their heads came about halfway up the opposite wall. They walked very slowly, taking long strides. Then they all stopped, turned, and raised their heads in my direction. All simultaneously raised their arms and with their hands beckoned me. The movement was something like snatching or feeling for something as the palms of their hands were face down. Terror rooted me to the spot. "Go on, we're all getting stuck in the passage," my friend jerked at my sash. "What's the matter?" "Well, there's nothing much to see," I stammered, taking another step forward. My candle was in my right hand. I put my left hand on the wall to steady me and stopped again. My hand wasn't on cold rock, but on something soft and wet. As it moved, a strong gust of wind came from nowhere and blew out my candle. Now I was really scared in the darkness. "Go back," I yelled to the others. "Go back and guide me back by my sash. My candle has gone out and I cannot see." In utter panic, I backed into the narrow little passageway and forced the others back too, until we backed into the large room where Joe and my friends were waiting. What a relief that was. "Well, did you see anything?" asked one of them. "No," I quickly replied. "There was a draft in there that blew my candle out." "Let's go," said Joe the guide. I looked up at him. Our eyes met. I knew that at one time he had seen what I had seen. There was an expression of caution in his eyes, adding to my reluctance to tell anyone. I decided not to. Out in the open again, And in the hot Malta sunshine, we thanked the guide, and as we tipped him, he looked at me. If you really are interested in exploring further, it would be wise to join a group. There's a school teacher who is going to take a party exploring soon, he said. There's the school kids, man.
Yep.
What? I left my address with him and asked him to have the school teacher get in touch with me, but I never heard any more about it until one of my friends called me to read an item from the Valletta paper. There's a newspaper. It was in the newspaper.
Right. So this is the story of the school children then, right?
That's right. This is the
That's
account
those
that
are the
we have.
ones.
I say, Lois, remember that tunnel you wanted to explore? It says here in the paper that a schoolmaster and 30 students went exploring and apparently got as far as we did. They were roped together, and the end of the rope was tied to the opening of the cave. As the last student turned the corner where your candle blew out, the rope was clean cut, and none of the party was found because the walls caved in. The shock of this information didn't change my determination not to say anything about my experience in the Hypogeum, but several months later, my sister visited Malta and insisted on making a tour of the underground temple on House Afflieni. Reluctantly, I went along, retracing the same route, but there was a different guide this time. When we went down to the lowest level, to the room where I had taken off to explore, the tunnel entrance was boarded up. Wasn't it here that the schoolmaster and the 30 students got trapped? I asked the guide. Perhaps, he replied, with a non committal shrug of the shoulders, and refused to say anything more. You cannot get a thing out of the Maltese when they don't want to talk. You are new here, aren't you? I asked him. Where's Joe, the guide who was here a couple of months ago? I don't know any Joe, he shook his head. I alone have been showing people around this catacomb for years. Who was this guide? And why did Joe disappear after we left Hal Safliani that first time? And why is it impossible to get any facts on the disappearing schoolchildren? In the summer of 1960, Louise Becker, NYSIB's treasurer, visited Malta during her European trip. She researched old newspaper files and the museum trying to get some facts to substantiate my story, but in vain. The Maltese are tight-lipped about the secrets of their island. What do you think about
Wow.
that, John?
That's yeah. It's just wow. That's an interesting article.
Yeah. I
So
mean,
you have the children, and you have Jessup, Louise Jessup, who went just before the children. The children come out of the National Geographic article, and Louise Jessup goes after the children actually just before the children disappear. And she was supposed to go on that little trip
but she
with the
was never
school teacher.
contacted. Right.
Right.
Okay, so much of this story revolves around Lois Jessop um, as a person. So bear with us while we go through all of this because it is quite compelling.
Yeah. Who was
Especially when you
she?
start,
Right.
yeah, especially when you start going through that, like who she was, you know, who she rubbed elbows with in society, all of this stuff, right? So what's strange is we were just talking about this SIB, which is the New York Saucer Information Bureau. Now, I what I'm thinking is this. After Lois had seen what she saw, I think she was much more open to the anomalies on our world, recognizing them as being more true than perhaps false. And so her joining, a UFO information bureau is not all that shocking, especially then trying to publish this article through there because who's gonna take that story? The New York Times, the New York Post is gonna write some sensational article and call her crazy probably, right?
Right. Right.
So okay, so she attended a talk with the in New York with her saucer group. Lois Jessop was reminded of the peculiar appearance of the 20-foot giants she saw in the Hal Saflieni by a couple of 35 millimeter slide illustrations in someone's number 4 saucer lecture concerned with mediumship. The slides were copies of a mystic's drawing of the human aura. Of the huge cavern dwellers she saw, she said, quote, their covering seemed to be like long white hair, combed downward and shaggy looking. Their heads were oval and elongated at the chin and top, and the hair on their heads fell about their shoulders like a draped monk's cowl. So, this is the description that she gave in detail to the saucer group of these giant beings that she saw. We've got potentially the most bizarre story and account of giants being seen in the underworld, in the inner earth, that we've ever seen before. So, was Lois Jessop, was she intelligence and this was a psychological operation? Or did she really see what she said she saw and these children went missing by the
Right.
same group that
Right.
she saw?
Yeah, those are the questions, really. When we look at, well, let's just start with Lois Jessup. So when we look at what she claims, what we do is we look at what she was doing, feeling, and perceiving at the moment she claims that this happened, right? Because when we look at that specific thing, blind, of course, we we get straight into what they were doing at that time frame. And if there are any lies, it's going to place them somewhere else, or it's going to place them in the location, and they're making the rest of it up, right? So what we have with Lois Jessup on that particular matter, that particular incident, was we have her in a cave system. So she's deep underground. It's dark, it's dank, there's minimal lighting, very, very low lighting, and she's with other people. We have her like like holding on, like what she claimed to holding on to her sash. We have her holding on to her sash. We have her heart beating very fast. This subject in the data is very nervous, right? But also really excited because who knows what's down there. And she basically had, in the story, she had broken off from the guide. The guide was like, if you want to go that way, go that way. It's your dime, it's your
It's your
death.
funeral.
Yeah. So she was very, very, very high emotionally pitched in the data, but wanted to see what else was down there. So especially what the guide had said really stoked her interest. She's like, "Well, you're telling me this is like, don't press that red button over there," kind of situation. She was one of those, it seems like, who would want to press the red button if you told her not to. So she's down there. So the data starts to describe exactly what she said. So we have these large creatures showing up in the data. This is her perception. She's actually seeing this. So we have these large creatures in the data. We do have them having hair, like they are hairy, but they're very, very large. Now, I don't know if they're 20, 25 feet or shorter. I have no idea, because the remote viewing data basically just goes into very large subjects. And these subjects are blind, okay, or they have very, very minimal, like, eyesight capacity, probably because
Which,
they live down there,
I was going to
right?
say, like, this happens
Obviously.
to moles, right? It's like blind
Right.
moles. Like, you live underground long enough and your eyesight just goes, right?
Right. And so what the data was describing is that they were using a kind of echolocation that they have developed while living underground, right? Like, these beings are somehow relationally, like, distant, connected to the original one long-headed skull beings that were down there. So there had been some type of evolution with these things, and obviously, like, they have been under there for a very long time. So what Jessup was saying across the board was true. Like, this is what she saw. Like, her trip down there was very short, right? It was very quick, because she saw them, she got freaked out, and she left, right? It was very quick. And our data completely verifies that she did see what she claimed to have seen. And then, going further with the data, these beings are like, they would be like distant relatives of an evolutionary process underground from these old Nephilim that came from somewhere else. So I don't know what the slimy thing was that she touched or felt in that moment. Yeah. I don't know. I don't know what that was, because when you get to these cave systems, you're going to have probably other things as well. Like with regard to the hypogeum and all that stuff that's under there, others had come in to cut their own space within it as well. I mean, heck, it could be the troglodyte of ancient Greece that's running past her, right? Because I think that in part these beings are down there as well. Now, there is a water table there, though, right? When you go deep enough, you're going to hit the water table. So the cave system is going to have to go horizontally because it's going to hit the water. It's inevitable. Um, so with the children, now when we get to the children, which is really a messed up story. Like, can you imagine, your child disappears, and you're going to be looking for your child. You're going to be going to that area underground to search for him if you were a parent of that child. And for those people to hear screaming, I mean, that's just insane. It's
Yeah.
insane.
Yeah,
Like,
so just to requote the article, it said for weeks mothers declared that they had heard wailing and screaming from underground, but numerous excavations and searching parties brought no trace of the lost souls. After 3 weeks they were finally given up for dead.
right. Just a really intense story. And so we looked at the reality of the story to try to understand what happened, if anything happened at all. And oftentimes in this type of remote viewing data, it either directly goes into fantasy, story, mythology. You get terminology like that, or if it's true, you have you need more remote viewers for this kind of thing, because you're asking for something that is almost more like a binary type question, a yes or no type situation, which doesn't type of questioning doesn't work so well in remote viewing because the remote viewers describe. But when remote viewers across the board start describing a situation that is akin to people claiming what happened, then you have something that is more real than the other side. Otherwise, they'd be explained like, oh, it's like Santa Claus or mythology or something like that. They would be going into that eventually in their data. So with this, we do have a group of children that are a large group. Like they're moving through a tunnel system. We get ropes. We literally get ropes. We get this group moving through a tunnel system. What happens, like, we have clear uh representations, like straight up representations of the rope being cut. The
Somebody
rope
cut
being
the rope.
cut. Either somebody cut the rope or something collapsed on it purposefully, but there was something else behind this, right? So we have the rope being cut and them getting confused and utterly lost. So
Mm.
they basically kept going. They didn't know where they were going. They go down to where the water table is, and when they hit the water table, um, the tunnels go off in all sorts of different directions, right? So they just go and go, and then what shows up in the data are the large, hairy, echolocation type blind giant things. What are they? So this shows up in the data, and this is like, so these people, the kids, are specifically trying to move away from what they're hearing in the cave, right? And they're trying to move away from this, and on the other side of that, we have these things that are like trying to find them based on echolocation. So them screaming is even more horrifying when you realize the fact that these things down there that Lois Jessop saw, that we saw in remote viewing data, are following them based on their screams,
Right.
right? So eventually they're found, and that does not end well. It's done.
They
It's
were
over,
they were
right?
consumed by these things?
Yeah, they're basically consumed, because the thing is that that whole thing, the upper part, the so-called
Yes.
temples on the surface, were
The
geared to
orthoron,
hold
the
these. Right,
hypogeum. Right.
right. So hold people. So yes. So yeah, that's what it appears to be. It's like when you get to the idea of rock cut into a funnel where they're basically harvesting water. It's not so much. I mean, you would say that today, but it's not so much what it was for originally because as humans go through there and they travel, this is why the Hypogeum is closed off all around and people can only go to the oracle room for the most part. Because if you can't see that funnel and you fall into it, that is one of the traps, right? So you've got these things that are underground. Now, I don't know if they're underground right now. I have no idea. At least back then they were. I mean, I assume that they're still there somewhere. But you have to remember it like doesn't go to an inner earth kind of situation, at least right there. It's because there's a water table, and we're seeing that in the data, this water table. You get to a certain level. So yeah.
Can let me ask you a question? Why do
Yeah.
you think, if these things are down there, why do you think they don't come up to the surface?
They're
Like,
blind.
well, okay, I understand that they're blind, but is it something else? Like, I mean, why? So, as I believe you, like, I believe you. Like, I understand the remote viewing data. I believe Louise Jessop or Lois Jessop's account rather. Um, but it's just these things are deep under there. They must have been under there for hundreds and hundreds of years. Why aren't these things coming up to the surface? Is like just the question. Like, why do these beings live underground and don't come up? Is there something more to that? You know?
Well, I mean, I think that for the most part, they've just basically established themselves as living within the Earth in general, and I believe that those tunnels that are above the water table they probably go pretty far, right? And I when we had originally remote viewed like the whole Nephilim thing, the contingent of beings who broke off from other contingents, some stayed on the land, and they basically developed into the giants of old, right? Where native peoples would fight them and whatnot. The ones that went underground decided to just live underground. That's what they wanted to do. They wanted to stay away from human population for the most part. Stay away, stay hidden. And so
Well,
that's what you have. And so there has to be something extremely extensive underground and enough food source and whatnot in order to survive. And it could be that that's some very tiny, small contingent that's left of these beings. It very well could be hardly any of them are left. And, they wouldn't come up in a highly populated area. I highly doubt it, you know.
they would be killed right away if they did.
Oh,
I
yeah.
mean, probably know that. But the other thing too is, some of the reports that we saw that we were discussing in previous episodes was that this tunnel system goes all the way to the Vatican. The tunnel system under the Hal Saflieni Hypogeum goes all the way up to the Vatican. If that's true, the tunnel system that these beings are in are vast, and who knows what else is down there with them?
Right.
We just don't know, or how
Right.
deep it goes, and how
Right.
extensive it is.
Right. Right. I mean, I imagine that the tunnel system would have been way more extensive before that ice age flooding, when the ice age basically ended. It would have been way more extensive because that stuff was way above the water table. I don't know what it looks like today. I mean, heck, there could be colonies just cut off from each other after that time. You might find more in Italy than you do on
or
that island.
or even colonies that still war with one another. I mean,
Right.
there's so many places, even in the United States, where people hear noises underground from the surface,
Right.
like booms and different strange buzzing, and who knows.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I know. But from our standpoint, I would say that these both of these stories are appear to be true, you know. It looks like they are because we would get totally different data if they were fake stories. So, very very interesting, very curious.
If you're still with us and you're listening to this right now, can you believe that this is true? I mean, this is like this is crazy, crazy stuff. Like this has got to be one of the most I mean, just interesting accounts that we've found that's left that actually made it through, like the goalie, you know?
Yeah, exactly. I know. I know. Very strange and not talked about. Just
Not
not
no,
brought up.
not a whole heck of a lot. I mean, we've got like think about it. We covered this in a previous episode, but up until about 2000, what was it, 14 or something, no one was really even visiting Malta. Like we're talking about some of the most megalithic sites in the world being in Malta, Sicily, Sardinia,
Right.
and no, like Sicily, Sardinia, sometimes people go there, but Malta, no one really hears about it. I mean, most of the time when you're hearing about Malta, you're going to be talking about the Knights of St. John artwork that's there, some of the buildings that were made, but the megalithic sites are really where it's at. I mean,
Right.
some of the most interesting megalithic sites in the entire world. Well, there you have it. The Hal Saflieni Hypogeum. I recommend that you go there, but I also recommend that you don't.
Well, that's the
Um,
thing. It's like, you can go there, but it's like you just get to go to the Oracle room because it's tightly controlled. I mean, in fact, back in the 1844, there was a rumor that the British had buried some of the tunnels, and then you have the workmen who found it later on, and they reburied it. So it's like I think that there has been a lot of control, a lot of knowledge and understanding by those people in power who understand what's down there and trying to keep it away. I mean, that's also why the archaeologists who have done very good research on this, especially around the teeth, get shut down because you can't raise the questions of what else is down there. You just can't if you want to keep it hidden.
well, and that's just it right there. I mean, when you start looking into the megalithic sites, you might come to the conclusions we have in this series about what it was for, who was really there, how long it goes back. It would completely change the history books leading up to today, not to mention the fact that there's actual fabled beings living within the earth right underneath Malta that most people living there, the 450,000 people, are unaware of themselves, or they've heard whispers about it in the local pub and it stays there because most of these local areas, they know their culture. They talk
Right.
about it with one another, but it doesn't really get out. I mean, that's just
So
how it
be
is.
careful with that secret door in your pantry to the Malta underworld.
If you
Be
guys haven't
careful.
seen, John is referring
Board it
to
up.
a previous episode, there was a house in Malta whose pantry went into the tunnels beneath the island. How many more are out there? We don't know, but maybe someday John and I can go there, explore for ourselves.
Yeah, exactly. In the comment, please leave a comment if you have a secret door in your pantry, and we'll be
Yeah,
heading over to your house.
we'll visit. We'll go explore. We'll let you know what we find.
Yeah.
Well, you guys, hope you enjoyed this episode. John, thanks so much for being with us. This really blew the top off of what's really happening in Malta. Hope you guys appreciated that. We'd love to know what you guys think. So please leave comments below. The engagement helps the channel. You guys watching this episode on YouTube or Podbean, wherever you are, Spotify really helps the channel. We appreciate you guys very much. We'd love to know what you think. John, thanks so much for being here. And for all of you at home, we hope you thought this episode was as insane and out of this world as we did.